Alright, Crim 20, let's do Chapter 9, Special Offenders. They're all special, aren't they? Alright, special offenders. Offenders whose circumstances, conditions, or behaviors require management or treatment outside of the normal approach to supervision. So, we are going to continue a little bit talking about the whole juvenile offenders in criminal court. So we're not going to talk about the juveniles in juvenile court anymore. We're going to talk more about the whole juveniles in criminal court. Waiver or fitness. I mentioned this during the last chapter. Most states will call this a waiver when a juvenile, a person who was under 18 at the time they committed the offense, is going to be charged as an adult for the crime. Most states will call that a waiver. They have a waiver to go to the adult court. In California, we call it a fitness hearing. It's Welfare and Institutions Code Section 707B, or a fitness hearing. A fitness hearing is ultimately a hearing where a juvenile court judge will determine whether or not a juvenile who committed whatever the offense is fit for juvenile court. And here we go. I'm going to tell you a story. I had a case, really kind of a super frustrating and really sad case. The young man was 17, and he lived, this is my first probation officer job. I was in Tulare County, and he was charged with murder. He shot and killed his mom's pimp. The kid was 17, and mom, he had witnessed in the past the pimp beating up his mother. So he's at home with his mom, and he sees the pimp walking up the front walkway. And the kid pulls a shotgun from behind the front door, opens the front door, and blows the pimp away in the front yard. Okay, kills him. And again, the kid's 17. The pimp is unarmed and has not done anything at that time to the mother. As soon as the kid does this, everybody panics, and the kid takes off, and he goes away, runs off to Mexico. And he's gone for probably about a year and a half. And while he's in Mexico, he's, oh, good Lord. Of course, my phone has to start ringing. He's in Mexico, and while he's there, he's talking to the people in the little village where he is, and he's a good kid, otherwise never been arrested, all that kind of stuff. And the people of the village where he's staying say, people in the village tell him, you should go back. Anybody in their right mind would understand why you did what you did. You were protecting your mom. He was a bad person. Blah, 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 whatever. So the kid says, you know what, you're right. So he comes back. If you could see my face right now, I'm like holding, I have the palm face, whatever. Yeah, I'm shaking my head because the poor kid never should have come back. And I think as human beings, we all can kind of understand that the kid was protecting his mother. At the same time, the pimp was not at that very moment in any way threatening the mom. So that was a absolute murder, and the kid was clearly guilty of murdering the man in his front yard. So I had to prepare the fitness report for the court for that young man. And I had to make a recommendation to the court as the probation officer as to whether or not he was fit for juvenile or adult court. Now, in the meantime, the kid had turned 18. He might have been 19 by the time I had him. Didn't matter. It only mattered that he was under 18 when he committed the offense. But when you write this report, one of the things that the court considers is the seriousness and the gravity of the offense. Well, you really can't commit a crime more serious than murder. And, I sit down and I'm talking to the kid and I'm telling him, I totally understand why you did what you did. But it's a murder and you're going to prison. And, you know, the kid looks at me, and I think that he appreciated that I was honest with him, because that was kind of always my goal, not to be that jerk that was gonna lie to him. But yeah, the kid went to prison, and he went to adult court, and he ended up going to prison for murder. But that was a kind of one of those, and I hate to say it, it was a no-brainer fitness, because the nature of the offense was so serious that he was clearly not suitable for juvenile court. There's no way that a juvenile institution could have handled the rehabilitation needed, you know, to deal with someone who had just murdered someone. Direct file is another way the prosecution's office can directly file charges into adult court. There are some statutory exclusions for direct filing, but we're not going to go into that because, anyways. Blended sentencing. Sometimes, I don't see this a lot, but sometimes you'll see someone go into the adult court and get sentenced. You'll see a juvenile go to adult court because of a fitness hearing and get sentenced to prison for kids. That's DJJ, CDCR, DJJ, Division of Juvenile Justice. And then once they turn 18, they would go to the big prison. This does not happen in California, so I'm going to kind of skip through it too. Blah, blah, blah. Sega. Okay, this is what we do typically in California. If a juvenile is sentenced to an adult facility, they have to be housed completely separate. Completely separate. They cannot be within sight or sound of any adults in the facility. Okay, enough with the juveniles. So, prisoners with substance abuse needs. So again, we're still talking about special offenders. As you can imagine, between 63 and 83% of offenders are under the influence of some sort of drugs when they commit crimes. So they have assessments, treatment, and monitoring. As you can imagine, this is going to shock you. I'm being sarcastic right now. Drugs make their way into prison. My friend Brian the murderer, who spent 21 years in prison, said he'd never tried heroin until he went to prison. And then he became a heroin dealer. He actually sold drugs in prison. How do they get it in there? You know how they get it in there. Through their prison wallet. I'm going to let you all think about that. Yep, that's what I mean. Okay. And then you all have to Google it. You probably have to do like, what's that website? Urban Dictionary. Okay. Prison wallet or your prison purse. Okay, mentally ill offenders, antipsychotic drugs. There are a lot of mentally ill offenders. A lot of mentally ill offenders in prison, and this causes a significant issue. They don't necessarily receive the mental health services that they need in prison. Antipsychotic drugs can definitely be a problem or a lifesaver for the prisons. Mentally ill offenders definitely can suffer while they're in custody. They typically remain incarcerated longer than other prisoners. As you can imagine, they probably act out. They are disproportionately abused, beaten, and raped. They become much sicker. I don't know, is that even a word, sicker? They become much more sick, yeah, you know what I mean. They are more likely to be in solitary confinement. They are more likely to commit suicide. They are more likely to reoffend, and they are very expensive to house because they need more supervision. So it's definitely a significant problem in correctional facilities. Aging offenders. So we do there are a lot of issues when you have older people in custody. They become abused. They require a lot of medical care. They become very expensive. Medical parole is basically when people get released from prison because they're getting released to a nursing home or to maybe sometimes to a hospital. There are also wings in prisons that are just hospitals, and if an inmate is in a coma, things like that, sometimes they will medically parole them. Compassionate release is the release of a terminally ill inmate prior to death. I don't really believe that compassionate release happens that often, unless, I guess, depending on the crime. There have been some issues with compassionate release where offenders have miraculously gotten well. So, it's a tough one. Violent offenders, of course, also. So violent offenders obviously can be more difficult to supervise because, well, they're violent. They can attack staff. They can attack other inmates. You have to have more staff to supervise them. So the cost is more, that you need more to supervise, and they're just overall more difficult to house. Oh, sex offenders. And then we have sex offenders. Offenders who have committed a legally prohibited sexual act, or in some states, any offender who commits any crime that was statutorily defined to be sexual in nature. This is a tough group to supervise because, number one, they're very hard to rehabilitate. They are, a lot of people would say, and whether this is accurate or not, I don't know, but they would say that these cannot be rehabilitated or are very, very difficult to rehabilitate. They're very manipulative. That I believe it is true. And they are also preyed upon in custody. So, yeah, these are another type of offender who is very difficult to supervise in custody. Pedophile, someone who is sexually attracted to and molests children. The treatment and management of sex offenders is different than kind of other types of treatment. Victim-centered, I think one of the first things they try and do is get the offender to acknowledge that there is a victim and not say, oh, we were in love, my 3-year-old niece loved having sex with me, when this is a 40-year-old man or something like that. You have to have someone who can treat these offenders that has special knowledge, and there has to be monitoring and evaluation. You have to remember that these are a very manipulative group that will say whatever you want to hear, and they will walk the walk and talk the talk, but are they really rehabilitated? Really tough group, really tough one. And then we have civil commitments statutes. So I'm going to, again, another story. I don't know how many more slides we have. I think we don't have very many. So I'm going to tell a story. When I first started with probation in Fresno, I went on a tour of what was then the California Youth Authority. It was called CYA. It is now called the Division of Juvenile Justice. Now, basically, that's a prison for kids, for youth. And we went on a tour of the sex offender treatment program. And while we were in there, at that time, they could house, and I think they still can, they could house offenders up until their 25th birthday. So they had offenders in there as young as 13, and they had offenders in there as old as 24. Yeah, okay, as young as 13 and as old as 24. Now, they were all males, so this is an all boys facility. And we, there was a young man who was there. He was 24. No, was he 24? Yeah, he was 24. And he was going to speak to us about his experience at CYA. It was like I said, it was a group tour. We were with some prosecutors and some judges, probation officers, police officers, stuff like that. A bunch of us were just kind of going on a tour of the facility to see what it was all about. And he told us what he had done and why he was there. He also told us that while he was there, he was grooming, basically trying to molest other youth there at the facility. A young man, a 13-year-old boy at the facility. They were housed in a dorm type setting. So they were in like a big, like a big gym in bunk beds. 24-year-old man and a 13-year-old boy were in the same gym type facility, which was shocking to me. But anyways, while we were there, he said, you know, I'm going to be 25 pretty soon, and I'm going to age out, meaning they had to release him on his 25th birthday. They had no choice because of his age. And he said, I'm very afraid to leave because I know in my heart that I am going to molest again. I know that I am not well, I'm not better. And when I get out, I am very fearful that I'm going to victimize someone else. And it was shocking. And he wasn't being a jerk about it. He wasn't bragging, none of that kind of stuff. This kid was, I call him a kid, but he was very brutally honest about what he felt, and it was completely shocking. And it just so happened that he happened to come out of Fresno County. He had been sent to CYA out of Fresno County. I think we were up in Stockton. That's where the tour took place. That's where he'd been housed for quite a few years. And there is something called a civil commitment, where the prosecutor or the DA, district attorney, from the county of origin, which happened to be Fresno for this kid, can file a petition with the court, have you deemed a sexually violent predator, and you can be civilly committed to a mental facility / prison for an additional 2 years for the safety of the community. I hope that makes sense. So as soon as we got back to Fresno from that tour, the DA's office immediately started working on the paperwork to have that young man committed for an additional 2 years. I mean, there had to be a court hearing about it, and a judge had to agree with it. But after hearing him talk and seeing kind of the fear in his eyes, he knew that he wasn't ready to get out. I mean, would he ever be ready? I don't know. But he was deemed a sexually violent predator and stayed in for an additional 2 years. So there is something called a civil commitment, and that I hope at least helped somebody not get victimized by that young man. So anyways, offenders with infectious diseases. If you work in a correctional facility, you need to assume that everybody in that facility has an infectious disease. If you work in the streets with probationers, parolees, if you're a police officer, basically you have to assume everybody has an infectious disease. HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, hepatitis, pretty much you name it. Correctional facilities, especially youth correctional facilities, scabies, lice, pretty much staph, you name it. You can get pretty much, and I've seen this happen. Anyone who has worked in a correctional facility or around people who've worked around people are probably familiar with this kind of stuff. It's very important that you, as a correctional officer, as a police officer, as a probation officer, as a parole agent, any of these types of things, are very aware of how to protect yourself and how to protect other inmates from infectious diseases. However, there are also HIPAA laws and privacy laws, which also makes it kind of tricky because you can't share information. So you just have to assume that everyone has these diseases. And like I said, I have seen firsthand people get all kinds of horrible things from inmates and people in the public. So these are also very tricky things to deal with. And again, you just have to assume that every inmate has something horrible.